Hi everyone, Massimo here from the Bluroot team, and today we're going to go through something big in Zoho, and that is the whole workflow automation section inside of the CRM. So this will include workflow rules, schedules, action, all of the features within there. Some of them I'll spend more time on than others, but throughout this video, you're going to learn the things to watch out for when building out a workflow, how to build them and the different criteria to use, and then how to debug them and check them, as well as all the other apps or actions within the workflow section. So there's going to be a pretty long one. As always, feel free to like, comment, subscribe. We love hearing from you guys. We love interacting with you. And also feel free to join my office hours. There's a link below. You can come and meet me, chat with me, bounce ideas off me. There's a group of us typically, so you can learn from others. See you in the video. Okay, let's get into it. So in order to find this workflow section, what you're going to do is when you get into your CRM, you're going to hit edit. Now, depending on the size of your computer, things may lie a little differently, and technically you can move these little bubbles around. But where we're going to focus is down here in the workflow automation or the automation section. So I'm going to touch on all of these, some of them briefly, some of them more intensively. And yeah, we're going to get into this. So I'm going to start with workflow rules, probably the biggest, heaviest one of them all. So the easiest way to think of a workflow rule is automating an action. And what an action is, it could be a task, a call, a meeting, something internal, or an email external to your clients or to your vendors or yourself, right? So that's typically the general automation. However, you can automate other things. You can send code to other softwares. You can update fields in the CRM. You can send out an SMS. So there's a lot of things you can automate, but that's basically what workflow rules are doing. Based on an action or a date or something within the system, it will do something for you. It's very powerful. So let's hop into it. As you build all these rules, I would encourage you to name them in a certain way with numbers or letters or decimals, some way of keeping track of where everything's at. And you can always query all your workflow rules by module and by status. You can also, if like you're not using naming conventions very well, you're like, what does this one do? You can actually toggle the module and then actually hit this button here, which basically allows you to see the summary, and it kind of tells you at a high level what it's doing before you go into it. So it's very easy to kind of keep track. So we're going to go ahead and hit create rule. This next part is choosing what module you're going to create this in, right? And so this basically, you got to ask yourself, okay, where is this automation going to happen? Where are my users going to be clicking a field or changing a status or changing a stage? Or where is the closing date or the birth date or whatever inside of the CRM? So we're going to start with the deal module. You might call it opportunities, something, and I'm just going to call it. And what I typically tell people to name things like are like, for example, deal 001, automate email, and keep track of these somewhere else inside of an Excel sheet or something. So it's very easy to reference. Trust me, you can get like a web going pretty quickly. Okay, so now on this page here, you have 3 options, and these options are really interesting. These are how you trigger a workflow. So that's why it says when. So think of a workflow as something always scanning in the CRM, right? And so when a record action happens, boom, it looks. And a record action is you doing something in the CRM. Or it's always scanning and a date happens, boom, it looks, right? And the last one, less commonly used, is score. Same thing, it's always scanning. Oh, someone hit a lead score of 50, boom, right? So that's kind of the way to think about it. So when do you want this to trigger? And so if I choose record action, which is definitely the most popular, you have 4 options here. Create, create or edit, edit or delete. Create's probably obvious. When you create a record, boom, right? Create or edit is very similar, but it's basically creating, it triggers, or editing any field. That's a key point here. So you could edit the name, the last name, the first name, the birthday, whatever. So that's one we'll talk about a little bit. Then there's edit. That's a specific field typically. You can make it edit of the whole record, or you can say only when this field is edited, right? And then there's delete. So these are all the actions that you can trigger something on. So let's go through this. So create is obvious, create or edit, pretty obvious as well. This is important. If you check this box, what this means is every time you create, which should only be once technically, or edit, which could be infinite times, you want this to boom, right? This is very dangerous. The reason being is if you check this box, let's say the scenario in your head is, okay, whenever I create or edit a new deal, I want an email to go to the salesperson saying, hey, you have a new deal. Well, if you check this box, it'll run on create, which is great. The salesperson will get an email saying they have a new deal. But then if you go change the closing date on the deal, email goes out. If you go change the dollar amount on the deal, email goes out. You're editing, right? So it's triggering again. So be careful with this one. There are use cases where you want that, but be very delicate. Edit is probably the most used one, at least that we use. This one you have a lot more control over. This, you can still check this and it's the same thing, like it's dangerous as I mentioned, but you can say specific fields get modified. So now you could say, for example, in the scenario we're gonna say when, you can click here, you would choose, so what I'm doing is typing, these are all the fields within the deal, right? So I'm choosing stage, and then you have a bunch of options here, is open, is closed, etc. But I'm gonna say, is the value sent quote? So now what I've told the workflow to do is whenever I move a deal into the sent quote stage, it will trigger. And every time, let's say you move it past that, and then you move it back to that, it will trigger again, which is probably what you want. If you don't want that, uncheck this box. This is the edit one, very popular. You can actually stack these, right? So you can actually hit here and have more criteria. So you can say when the stage is sent quote, and maybe you say the owner is a user, and you choose the user. Right, so you can get specific. You can do it by country, city, whatever you want. Right. The key here is this is basically saying specific field gets modified. Right. So when the stage is modified to sent quote, or when the owner is Tom, and you can choose any or all. So if you say all, it has to be both. If you say any, it has to be either or. So usually in this, we usually just keep it at one. So now, like I said, the workflow is moving. It finds one. Stage is sent quote. Now it's going to move to the next step. The next step is getting more specific, right? So all we've told it to do thus far is when the stage is sent quote, boom, right? Now we're going to get more specific. And we may say, well, when the stage is sent quote, great, but I only want this to happen for ones that the amount in the deal and any currency field has like this greater than or equal to thing is greater than or equal to, I don't know, 10,000, 100,000, right? So now it's going to find the sent quote, then it's going to go look at the condition, and if the condition's greater than 100,000, then it's going to go to the next step. So it's kind of this stepped approach. This is basically how code works, but this is in like a low-code GUI that anyone can use, right? Again, you can stack this stuff. So you could say when the amount is greater than 100,000, and maybe you want to say, I don't know, the city, I live in Toronto, is Toronto, right? And so now what's going to happen is when it's sent quote, great, condition greater than 100,000, good, city, Toronto, good, go to the next step. If either of these two are not true, it will break, or it will stop, it will not run. Now, if I click here and hit or, now it'll work if it's 100,000 or if it's in Toronto, right? Which may be what you want. So you can play with these criteria, you can add a lot more criteria. And then the final step is, what do you want to do? So now you've said when, you've said the condition, now it's like, what do you want to do? And so you have a bunch of options here. Field update is what it sounds like. You can update a field. So if I hit new update, I say update closing date, for example. And so now what you can tell it to do is you say what module you want to update a field in, and then you choose the field. So maybe I choose closing date. And I can choose a specific day, or I can do execution day plus 0 days, which would be today. So that's like an example of stamping a date, right? You can also update a field here, for example, deal name, you can update it to something, right? And so this one is used for things like changing owner or updating like stamping a date and things of that nature. Not heavily used. Then there's the assign owner. So this one's pretty straightforward. You can actually assign the deal to someone. I actually have a video, we'll link it here, where I go through this specifically. But at a high level, you can put some logic into assigning an owner. So if a deal is sent quote, it's greater than 100,000 and in Toronto, you can change the owner to someone else in your company based on even further criteria, right? So this is handy if you want to like kind of escalate it to a higher up salesperson or something at a certain stage. Then there's tags. So these are pretty useful, getting more and more popular. You can actually apply a tag to the deal. And these tags can be used for a bunch of stuff like just sorting your data or it can actually trigger other workflows. It can be put into reports. So I've seen people in this scenario, if it's greater than 100,000, they may tag it as high value or big deal or something. And then they have a report that shows all the big deals. You can also remove tags. So at a certain stage, when it's sent quote greater than 100,000, you can maybe remove a tag saying high priority and make it medium priority or something, right? And then probably the most popular two are email and task. Email notification is what it sounds like. You can send an email. And so when I do this, you have a few things you have to do here. So first, you have to create the email notification. So I can click here. And what this basically does is it's a container for the email. Think of it like that. So the email notification is who it goes to, who it comes from, and what template is it, right? So you name it something. This is an internal name. So I'll just say send quote email. No one sees this except for internal people working with this workflow. Then it says, okay, where do you want it to go? So click here. Now you have a bunch of options here. You can choose any lookup or person on the deal. So this is actually the contact on the deal. This is the CSM, the owner, the creator, the manager of the owner of the deal. So these are typically internal users, some of these, and then these are like external clients. But you can actually click here and choose other stuff. Maybe there's a person on the account, or maybe the contact. You can also choose whole roles and groups that were users in your company that get the email. So in this example, I'll hit users and I'll say Tom Demo needs to get an email. You can also CC anyone external to the firm. You can actually hit here and you can put emails here. And so how you do that, you do tbd@gmail.com and then a comma. And when you do the comma, you'll see that little highlight with the X. That basically means that it'll go to that person. So we're gonna hit save. Now you actually have to create an email template, right? And so when I hit here, it's going to try to get me to choose an existing template. I'm going to go ahead and hit create here. I'm not going to go through all of template creation in this video. We have a video here on talking about how to do that. I typically choose the plain text. That makes it look like you're actually sending it from your inbox. These ones look a bit more automated. So I'll go here. So this is actually the subject line that someone will see in the email. This is actually the email content, and you can actually go through this and build it out. So by typing the hashtag symbol, you can actually bring in what are called merge tags, right? And so merge tags actually pull information from the CRM and allow you to personalize it. So I could say hi, and in this case, I would click here and probably go to the user first name. So hi Massimo, this would be like the owner of the record. You have a new deal, right? And you could go through this merge tag and do all of that stuff. And then once you hit save, choose a folder. You can create a new folder as well. Save, and then go back to the tab where the workflow was and hit that little refresh, and it'll allow you to choose the template, and you hit save. So that's sending an email, and you can send a few of those, right? So it doesn't just have to be that one. You could see here I could hit action and now send another one, right? And they'd probably go to different people. Then there's tasks, kind of similar. So task would be a to-do item in the CRM, so it's not going to an external user. So we'll hit here. When you create a task, you have to name it something. You have to put a due date, right? And so what this due date means is the day it's triggered plus how many days. So if today is September 2nd, do I want it to be due 2 business days from now? And that would mean it would be due Tuesday, the 6th or whatever, because there's a weekend, right? You don't have to use business days. You can use normal days. And then you could have a status here. Typically, when you create tasks, you're going to create them as not started, like you want someone to do them, right? And then the who it goes to, if you leave it blank, it'll go to the record owner. So if you're the owner of the deal, you will get the task. Otherwise, you can actually click here and choose the user. These last 2 buttons here, notify the assignee, will basically send them an email letting them know that they've gotten a task. And then remind the assignee, you can actually tell it to remind them X amount of days prior to the due date or on the due date, something like that. So they're little handy features. So in this case, I'm not going to create one, but you could have emails and tasks, right? So you can have a ton of stuff going on here. Create record is an interesting one. I'm not going to go into it too much in this video, but basically what this allows you to do is to create another record in the system. For example, you're in the deal here. If I hit create record, I can actually say I can create another deal or a contact or an account, things related to the deal. So let's say the deal is sent into quote stage, like we said. Maybe we want to create another deal, so it'll walk you through creating it, and you can actually use the hashtag and create the deal. So maybe when a deal is sent into quote, and it's greater than 100,000, you want to create a second deal for some reason, and that's what you would do here. And then the last two are kind of code-based. So webhook is a technology where you could actually send data out of the CRM into another software. And function is similar, but a bit more intense. So I'm not going to go into those in today's video. We have other videos that talk about that. But these are the main actions you can do, right? And these are instant. So this will happen immediately when you hit send into quote. Now you can also do scheduled actions. You can see it's blanked out here. And the reason it's blanked out, if I hit the pencil, is because I checked this box. Zoho basically can't go through and repeat this if you're saying every time. Basically what happens is, let's say you do want a scheduled action, you see now you can do it. Zoho will run and then it will schedule out those actions 2 days from now, 3 days from now, etc. If you allowed it to go again, it would mess up all the schedules. It would get pretty messy. So there are use cases for this, typically drip campaigns. When you move it to a certain stage, you want an email to go out instantly, and then you can choose hours, days, or minutes later. So if I go 1 hour later, then it has the same builder. What do you want to go out? And then you can actually build another one 2 hours later, 3 hours later, 5 hours later. And so it starts building out over time. Now, the one thing I wanted to show you here as well, and then we'll kind of wrap up the workflow, is there is actually a way to add more conditions. So if I click here, and this is something a lot of people don't do, and they should, because it conserves workflows. What you could do up here is you could actually just say, for example, the stage is modified to any value. So anytime the stage is changed, boom, it's going to look, right? And then what you can do in this one is you can say, well, let's say I get rid of this, and I say, well, when the stage is qualification, do this. But when the stage is quoting, do this, and you could go through it again. And then once you do this one, you can add another condition. When the stage is this, do that. And you can add up to 10 conditions in this one workflow. So this workflow will always be running when the stage is changed, then it'll look at the condition and do that, right? And then if the stage is changed again, it'll look, and it goes through in order. So it checks all the conditions one by one, all the way down to 10. So that's definitely something you should check out, and it helps you conserve workflows. Way back in the day, you would have to create separate workflows for each of these, but now you can actually write all kinds of conditions. The other thing I'll just talk about here is the date and time. So this is another popular way of triggering workflows, and this is kind of what it sounds like. So what I just showed you was triggering workflows based on an action in the CRM, changing the stage, changing things like that. This is based on a date, so you're not changing anything. For example, maybe you put in the course end date in your deal, or the closing date, right? That's a popular one, closing date. And basically, you then want something to happen on that date or prior to that date, so you can do before or after at a certain time, and you might want it to recur once or monthly or yearly. So examples of this could be birthday emails or reminder emails or things of that nature. And so what you would do is you would choose your date, you would choose when you want it to trigger, before or after, and then you could tell it to recur if you'd like, but then the rest is all the same. That is basically a general overview of workflows, and I think if you follow that, you should be able to create most of the workflows you need as a business. So let's spend some time here going through some of the other things in this section, just so you understand. Schedules, just so you know, this is something basically for developers out there. It's like a cron scheduler. Basically, you can tell Zoho to repeat something on a schedule. The tricky part with this is typically you need to be a developer of some sort for this, because you have to write Deluge, which is Zoho's coding language. So for example, if I choose this, there aren't any in the system, but basically how this would work is you would name the schedule, you would choose a function, and then choose the frequency. And then what Zoho will do is it'll run that function every day, every week, every year. So, I mean, examples in our business, we've had things where we clean up deals at a certain interval, or we restamp dates at a certain interval. Every day we go through the whole system and restamp dates and stuff. So it's mass actions like that that typically the scheduler is used for, but it could also be sending data external, right? So you might say at the end of every day, I want to send data into my data warehouse or something. Well, a schedule could be used for that, right? Actions, this is just a repository for all of the things I showed you how to build in the workflow builder. So if you remember in the workflow builder, I showed you how to create an email or how to create a task. Well, here's that email. So this is just a repository outside of the workflow. So how the workflow goes is you set up the timing and then it uses an action, and all the actions live here: task, field update, webhook, function. So it's just a different repository. Assignment rules, I just brought out a video on that, but essentially what this is the ability to auto-assign leads, deals, calls, tasks to people based on some criteria. So So it's a really handy feature. Check out our video on that. But that's what this is. And honestly, 80-90% of the systems we work with get away with just workflow rules. Like assignment rules do have a place, but it's pretty rare from what we've seen. Case escalation rules, again, pretty rare. This obviously depends on if you're using the case module, which not a lot of people do, but basically what the case module is inside of the CRM is it's a way to track kind of issues. So if you want, you can actually escalate them. So if I go testing issue, so now you can set some rules. So you could base it off the case created time, and then you could say something like, if the case is from this user, or this user started this case, or the issue is X or Y, then you can actually escalate it accordingly. So the whole idea behind this, and there's a great help article here on it, the whole idea behind this is when a case comes into the CRM or you make a case, making sure that you're following up with them in a timely fashion and escalating them if you're not. Scoring rules, I believe I have a video on this as well, but I'm going to show you just kind of a high level here. This one is being used more and more, and the idea behind it is as certain data points are filled out in a record or they're interacting with you, like a lead, for example, you give them a higher score, and at a certain point they hit a score threshold where you want to reach out to them. So I'll do scoring rules here. I'll say I want it in the contact module. Go next. So you can see here there's a really neat builder. So if you're sending emails out from the CRM automatically or manually, it sends a hidden read receipt to the client, so you know if they're opening it or not, so or clicking it. And so if they open it, you can add 10 points, for example. If they click it, you can add 50 points. I guess 10 points. Or for every email bounce, you can actually take points away. What it'll do is it'll actually, and then similarly with campaigns here, and you can also add some criteria here to add or subtract points. So, and if you unhide certain modules, I've turned some off, but if you unhide some certain modules and integrate some certain apps, for example, Sales IQ, which is their website tracking app, you can add or subtract points based on how they're interacting on your website. So it's a really handy feature. It's a great way to basically prioritize which leads to reach back out to. And then you can trigger workflow rules off of those scores. So when someone hits a certain score, that was the last criteria in the workflow rule that I didn't show. But if someone hits a certain score, then you could trigger an email, trigger a task, everything I showed you. So let's talk about these two. These are pretty hefty. Marketing attribution, that's what this one is. And so basically, depending on where your lead comes from, if you're online heavy and you get a lot of leads from online, you may actually want to try to keep track of who you give the attribution to. So for example, someone finds you online, they go to your Google, type in your website or type in your service, they find your website, they go to your website. So Google was the lead source. But then they go to a webinar 3 months later, and then they actually go to your trade show. And you're keeping track of that with the campaign module and the CRM. What do you give attribution to? Google at the beginning, the middle, which was the webinar, or the end, which was the trade show. So that's what all of this is. And it's basically kind of a science, but you can choose how this all works. So for example, first touch would be the Google scenario. So if I click this, then you can see here that you can hit save, and then basically on the lead source, it will actually give accreditation, or in the tracking, it'll give accreditation to the first touch, right? So if you hit save, it's now going to go with this. If I go back here, so you can also do the last here, which would be, in my example, the trade show. You could do the U-shaped, which basically assigns the majority of the credit to the 2 stages and the remaining credit divided by every touch point. So you can see here lead creation, lead conversion, deal creation, deal 1. And you can kind of add more stages here. The W shape assigns the majority of the credit to the 3 stages and the remaining credit to the rest, right? So there's a few ways you can actually go through this. You can choose which one you want, and then this one actually allows you to add weightage to each kind of campaign. So I'm probably going to make a more specific video on this one that goes much deeper into it and kind of shows you how we're doing it. But I see a lot of people using one of these first two because they're frankly the easiest, but some of the other ones are more of an exact science, I guess you could say. And then last but not least is segmentation. So this is actually a really cool one. And basically the segmentation allows you to segment your clients based on their buying patterns, right? And so if I hit create new segment here, you can see it gives you a bunch of details. And so if I name this testing segment, then you basically say, okay, what do I want to segment? So I'm going to segment accounts. You can give it some criteria. So you may only want to segment certain accounts, customers, for example. But the idea here is to start understanding which customers buy the most and which customers are more likely to buy more or are more likely to churn and not buy anything from you, right? So I'm going to go ahead, click here. I'm going to say, okay, well, I want the contribution module to come from the deal, right? So the deal is what's going to tell me if they're going to buy more or not. And then the linking field, I'll say is the account name. The recency field, so how recent they bought from me, I'm going to say the closing date. The frequency field, how frequent they bought from me, I'm going to count. So if they have 1 deal or 5 deals or whatever. And the monetary field, I'm going to say amount. So now what this is going to allow me to do is it's going to grab all the deals and it's going to apply a model to show you the accounts that haven't bought from you in a while, or accounts that are buying from you more frequently that you don't even notice, and maybe you should go upsell, right? So that's the idea behind this. It's really good for e-commerce or high volume, right? And so now you can add scores, and these can be checked out in workflows, they can be used in reports, but now you can do things like, for example, score 5, if I add criteria, closing date is, let's say, so we'll give them 5 points if it's yesterday. And then you might work backwards from that. Is 2 months ago, is 1 month ago, is whatever, right? And then frequency, you might say it's kind of a similar thing. The count of deals is greater than or less than or whatever. So you might say, okay, someone should get 5 points with us once they've bought more than 5 things from us, right? And then monetary, similar, if they've bought more than 100,000 from us. And so once you turn this on, it'll actually put a ribbon inside of your contacts or accounts in my case, that'll start showing their values, and you'll be able to see, okay, who is buying the most from me, who's at risk of churning because they haven't bought in a while but they used to buy. And it's a really handy feature to start segmenting your clientele. So let me know in the comments if you want me to dig deeper into any of these specifically, but that's the automation tab. And I would say focus on the workflow one. That's a great place to start. It's fairly intuitive, and I hope you enjoyed the video. As always, please like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.